get the coffee. Let's get the tea. And then we'll go see if the sound's working. I'm mixing my Sri Lanka tea with my Earl Grey tea from England and from Sri Lanka. So that's pretty cool. Okay, my thing is going off because it's 10 o'clock. Let's see if we've got any. No, we don't have any indication that anything's working. So we'll go over to LinkedIn and see what they do to me. I think Periscope's done now for the. I think it's all done. We'll see, right? We'll see if anybody comes up on Periscope. Well, good, but I don't think they will. There we go. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Miglosh for the Wisconsin DMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing. Okay, well, we put on the calendar the next meetup. Those meetups are getting pretty popular. So check it out at wdma.org in the upper right corner. It says coming events, and it's the 13th of April, which is about 2 weeks or so, and on a Tuesday this time. And love to have you. We had a lot of fun last time, and I think we've got all the Zoom links figured out. We got the Zoom a little bit on the 11th hour. Happy to have a sponsor if you're interested in supporting WDMA. Okay, so now we're going to talk about news that you may not hear anywhere else. First of all, if you go into the Whopper, if you go into Burger King today, you can get a chocolate Whopper, flame broiled, and tomatoes and onions and lots of chocolate. And if you're not into for a burger, you can get dippers with chocolate swirl sauce. And on another note, Mike's has announced a hard seltzer with the flavor of charcoal and kale, which might be reminiscent of you Scotch drinkers and the stuff you poured on your throat. Bird's Eye is announced their potato waffles with a customized waffle-only toaster. You can't put bread in there. You can only toast these special waffles so that it can look cute on your table, and your kids will love it. Okay, and here's my favorite product. Okay, Duolingo has announced that most people spend up to 14 minutes a day on the loo, so you can kill two birds with one stone. Tengo esta cebolla y la voy a usar. I have an onion and I'm going to use it. Okay, and in case you haven't figured it out yet, these are all April Fool announcements. Okay, so, but I thought this one had a lot of merit. So if you've got a toilet paper company, you should maybe consider throwing that together. I don't see the style consultant, but anyway, let's get on to serious news. EnvyPack has announced a clear envelope, and from what I could tell in the video, it actually forms around your mailing piece. So you print the piece, or it could be turn of the drum digital, and you can do 4-color, and then you can address it, and then you can wrap multiple pieces in this clear envelope. It's polypropylene. It's 0.5 mil or something, 4.5 mil polypropylene. So it's lightweight. They say you can yield over 50% savings in postage compared to other plastic envelopes. Now, I don't think that means it's going to cost you half as much to mail it, but the differential that the envelope provides, it sounds like a suspicious statistic. But if you're from EnvyPack, let me know. I was impressed that it said that the company worked for 10 years with the pricing and classification division of USPS to develop this. I don't know if that's because no need to announce it every day. Yes, there is. You didn't write in. I didn't know if I was hearable. Anyway, division of the USPS to develop this EnvyPack. I don't know if that's because USPS takes so long. I remember driving to Chicago and trying to get the USPS to reclassify a piece of mail they decided was first class because it had personalization. This was back in probably 1981 or 2 or something. And I had to drive to Chicago to get a second opinion, and then they finally went with it. So let's just go over and see let's see a little. Oh, this will never work. Anyway, we'll try it. It won't work. Let's see what we get for that stuff. Never works where I go to Firefox. That's the right piece. Say okay before I switch. That's a little better. And then we'll go over here and say, where is it's on a YouTube. Okay, well, I think we can get it to work here. So let's go over here. Here's a demo of the envelope. And look at that. They printed the chameleon on the outside and on the inside. So it's engagement. But it's pretty cool anyway. And it's, as I said, it's formed around your package. I'm guessing that it requires special equipment to make that work. So you have to go to NVPack for that. It's not an endorsement. I'm just announcing it. Okay, this is from my friend Paula Jeske, and she gives you a real good primer, or primer, as they say across the pond. And I like that she starts with direct mail is experiencing a long overdue resurgence. She and I talked a little bit about that lately. And they've actually launched at Let Direct a couple of new catalogs in the past year, so that's pretty good. The two biggest surprises were that it takes a lot of time to properly put together an effective mailing and how expensive mail can be. Okay, now, caveat there, because back in the 90s, 80s, even the 80s, when people asked me how much, like I was at IBM and we helped them launch one of their computer supplies catalogs, and they said Gray Advertising brought me in to do cost projections, and I gave them the one that I thought would be the real projection, and I gave them the one that I thought would get them the account, and we did get the account. And then a year later they told me, but the real projections were right on the button. The others were a little more inflated, let's say. And most of that wasn't because there was anything wrong with the catalog. They had massive demand, but they didn't. So IBM asked me, how much is a catalog? Good looking business to business catalog. I said about $1. You'll want to do a nice one. And they said, how many businesses are there in America? I said, 10 to 14 million, give or take, depending on how small an organization you want to go to. A lot of the difference is, under 5 employees. And so they said, you mean for a measly $10 million we could mail to everybody in the whole country? Remember targeting? And I said, yeah, I suppose I wouldn't do it that way. I would, mail out a few 100,000 and then see how it goes and mail a few more. Oh, no, that's not the way we're going to do it. Those other guys are, they're in charge of getting the phones answered and making sure we have inventory. We're just supposed to get it launched. So anyway, a year later, I asked them what happened. They said, well, we basically sold out of all the inventory in the first 2 days. And then for a couple of months, we had nothing to sell. We couldn't keep anything on the shelf. And people got so mad that they quit calling. But overall, it was sort of a success. Yeah, so they should have listened. So it does take planning to it's not just about how you print the catalog, but it's how your website and how your order processing and how your customer support works, and there can be a lot involved. So it's always good to do what's called a rollout strategy. Okay. So, but back to expensive. When we get to the bottom of this, it's not entirely clear, but I think Paula is basically saying it's about $1. I think she's coming down to the same spot. So when you say it's super expensive, well, it's not that much different than it was 25, 30 years ago. Okay, so the biggest out of pocket is postage, and then paper, and then printing, manufacturing, and those are pretty fixed. You can't negotiate postage very easily. There's some things you can do. And then there's list prep and processing and post-campaign analysis. I like that she mentions that. So postage, she's going to start with a 50,000 piece scenario. Now, when we used to launch, that's how I got started in this, is launching catalogs business to business. And most people would say, well, there's fewer names in business to business, because, like, for example, with Cabela's, when we worked with Cabela's, their customer drops were 5 million on it one day, and that they were scaled up for that. I never worked with a business mailer, I don't think. Quill mailed about 40 million a year when I was working with them, so that would have been more than that a month. So maybe, you could say, but there's multiple decision makers within a company. So anyway, we would tell people if they wanted to start a catalog and they wanted to be serious about it, we would tell them 250,000 just to start and figure on mailing at least every other month for the first year. So that's that's basically 1.5 million. And I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a bunch of printers, and they were like, well, we don't ever do runs of 50,000. I said, you guys are thinking too small. No wonder people, what we've done is we've segmented ourselves out of existence. The only thing worse than just stopping with no testing is continuing to winnow down. I probably told you the story of Western Publishing, who used to be one of the biggest publishers in America. And they would send out test booklets or test books. My Little Golden Books were one of their big titles. And they would send out a book just to rented lists or to customer files to reactivate them. And they would say, if you like it, keep it and send us the money. And the finance department said, we send out a lot of books that never get paid for, which is actually kind of legal. If you didn't solicit it, then you don't have to pay for it. And so they said, we send out a lot of books that we don't get paid for. I bet we could rank the zip codes that we mail these books into and find the top bad debt. They called it bad debt. I would call it marketing cost. But the top bad debt zip codes. And so they quit mailing, instead of testing it and not mailing most or leaving out some or something and seeing the impact. They just lopped off 20% of their campaign. And yeah, the profits went up because, those were the worst, where people didn't pay. And it worked so well, they did it again. And now they've lopped off 40% of their mailings. And, one of my friends who was circulation director there quit and went to a different company because he could see the handwriting on the wall. And while they're supposedly getting more profitable, suddenly the warehouse is emptier, and the number of orders, and calls, the call center's too big, and the print runs, and they printed their own books, were shorter, and people weren't busy anymore all of a sudden, so they started laying people off there, and then they're really in a tough kettle of fish. Because now they really got to cut costs because the revenues are down. The profits are up, but the revenues are down. Not sustainable business anymore. And so 50,000, if you're doing any kind, if you said you wanted to do this for machine learning, 50,000, if you figure 5,000 per cell in business to business, which would be 5,000 orders at 1%, which is pretty high. I would say that might even be a little light for statistical validity. So that means you're only doing 10 cells. Well, what can you learn from 10 cells? Not much, right? Not much. So you can't really model statistically valid modeling at 50,000 and see what's going on. Yeah, sure, you can throw it in a neural net and something will happen, just like Western Publishing. So we always told everybody 250,000. I think that was a good number. But anyway, that aside, she says that postage for a 24-page catalog would be something like 50 cents per piece, with smaller trims being about 30 cents. And I was working with Lovesac back 3 years ago, and we were doing at least a 36, maybe a 48, but in that neighborhood. Not a big catalog, but a small catalog on a little bit better stock. And I think the in-the-mail cost on that was under 70 cents. So we did it. They were doing it with Quad. I wasn't, in charge of the paper or the weight decisions or any of that. I just know that it came in at about that, and they were doing about 150,000 run. So this is in the ballpark. It may be a little high, but again, if you double it, it's a pretty fair estimate, I would say. I would say with a little work, you can pretty easily come in around a buck. You can make it higher than that. I worked with Deluxe Check, and they were doing it for $1.50 because they were working with an ad agency. And they threw it at me across the table one day and said, "We heard you could do it for 50 cents." And you told back in those days, I'd say 50 cents if it wasn't extravagant. What would you change? And all we did was rearrange the pages. We didn't change one letter of copy or content. And the printer, I said, call your printer and see what happens if you printed, I think it was print 2/16s instead of, or 3/16s instead of a 4, an 8, and and 2/16s and an 8 or something. Anyway, so whatever it was spam risk. I like my phone is now telling me it's spam risk. Anyway, whatever it was, it saved him 160 grand on the next printing. So there are ways to cut costs. A lot of it is working with your printer because they'll know about the postage discounts and stuff. Explore printers and the most effective trim on press. I've seen catalog costs go down 15% just by trimming a 1/16 of an inch off, which you could lay them side by side and the average person couldn't even tell the difference. Oftentimes, explore papers and weights. Oftentimes, especially in calm times, somebody will order some kind of paper that nobody else wanted, and there'd be a lot left over because they planned to mail more and then they stopped or something. And the printer will have these weird paper varieties laying around that aren't long enough for their big customers. And sometimes, just working with your printer, you can get remnant paper. And if you don't care too much about, what the paper feels like, I was looking at a whitetail catalog magazine, Magalog we'll call it. And they always print on a really unusual stock. I felt the paper. This was just this weekend. And I talked to the guy who got it done, but he didn't know what paper. But I said, this feels like a latex. They add extra stuff to make the paper more dense and feel better. And in the U.S., it's mostly clay, and in Europe, it's mostly latex. And I said, it feels like a European paper. He said, I wouldn't know, but I said, nobody else that comes to your booth will do that. There's a cost benefit analysis you can do with adding pages. It's less expensive in the mail to add them, but oftentimes the extra products, especially if you're not the manufacturer and you're just kind of adding them to fill up space, a lot of times those don't help you much. They get about half the average sales of what you're already working with, and if they're outsourced, they're probably lower gross margin products also. So, larger page count, smaller trim size. If you can get, if a Slim Jim can work, Paula makes the comment that we used to almost always, there was a time when full-size catalogs consistently outperformed smaller trim size, but we're finding this is no longer the case, especially for new mailers without a benchmark. Okay, well, then it's hard to compare. And it's hard to do these size tests anyway. Most people don't want to do them because you'd have to do, not only do you have to print it 2 different ways, so you get shorter runs and less volume discount from your printer. There's 2 different setups, but also you have a whole different creative for the different formats. So it's a lot more work. I recommend testing it. If you've got a full-size catalog and you think it's going to help you, you really need to test it, and what you do is hold over some of the mailing from a previous mailing when it's not a big seasonal change. So maybe you have a spring mailing and you mail a couple, you hold over, 20, 30,000 from the main drop with a random selection of customers. And then you do the Slim Jim as your second drop. So you get the full run length and you mix those in. and then you get a good head-to-head on the same day test of the two formats without wrecking your run length, and this gives your creatives chance to adapt to it a little bit. That's the way to do a valid test, and it's pretty straightforward. It also gives you essentially a holdout test on the previous drop. You can evaluate the performance of those held out customers and see the true impact without using a bunch of goofy digital attribution. Well, it seems like this is a very worthwhile, as I said, this is a very, very worthwhile article. Thank you, Paula. And I'll give her a shout out over there on LinkedIn. Have a great day. Like and share. Your friends will know you're smart. Don't forget to go over to wdma.org events, and you will find this and sign up, and you can argue with me about the cost of a catalog or the merit of one. Have a great